Hello and welcome to the Bee Formless Flow Driven CEO podcast. I have the wonderful Pamela D. Wilson. I'm sure we pronunciate that D. Pamela D. Wilson, all the way from Colorado, Denver, Colorado, where it's Monday evening, I will say there, Pamela. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bea. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. And what an incredible woman you are. Someone who has owned three companies, plus the fact that you are a caregiving expert, which I absolutely love because we need more caregiving experts in this, what you just, said before, this complex world, and it's getting more and more complex that we're living in. I just want to kind of, I guess, share with the audience what a bit about this one, and I'll hand it over to you because I will not do justice. Everything that you've done in your career and everything else. So you said to me you've had your first company was in the elderly care space. Then secondly, or I could have this misread, but the second one was consulting and education, and you also had a business in expert witness work, which I still work in, which is around court cases in fiduciary. And I'm going to again let you explain that. But ultimately you're a caregiving expert. You're an author, an advocate dedicated to transforming the way families and organisations navigate care. And the founder of most recent company is Pamela D. Wilson, to that consultant education piece. Got over
Yes.
20
So,
years. Oh, sorry, here you go.
no, go ahead. Ask your question.
No, I was going to say you've got over 20 years plus experience as a caregiving advocate and coach, and you've worked directly with families, healthcare organisations, and policymakers to reimagine how care is delivered and sustained. But you're also this author of the Caregiving Trap, Solutions for Life's Unexpected Changes. And you are not just in the American market, you're in the global market, which is
Mhm.
quite incredible. So I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us a bit about your story and probably correct some of the things that I've said that you're like, hang on, B, haven't got that out exactly right, but you'll do it better justice than me.
So, my career started out not in the space I currently work in. Early on, I had a social work scholarship to do, helping older people, and I didn't take it. I actually went into corporations. So, corporations like Conagra and Best Foods and Unilever, and I did marketing for products. So, anybody in the States who buys Ora wheat bread or Entenmann's English muffin or Thomas English muffins or Entenmann's like baked goods, I worked on those products as well as Healthy Choice. But midlife, my parents were a lot older. I was the youngest of six kids, and they needed a lot of care. And so I made a career change, going back to like, why didn't I do that thing I was going to do when I was younger? So my first company was a care agency going in to take care of the elderly and disabled. I did that for 7 years. And then that translated to the care management fiduciary organization where we managed care for the elderly and disabled, but I also had a legal role as a court-appointed guardian, medical and financial power of attorney, personal rep of the estate and trustee, which then translated into my current work, which is the expert witness work that you mentioned and consultations with caregivers worldwide and a lot of education because caregiving is complex and it's stressful. And I just find that families trying to navigate it really do struggle quite a bit, regardless of where they live.
Oh, they absolutely. And why do you think that is? Like, why do you think they struggle so much?
Well, one, it's unexpected. So if you don't have caregiving discussions in your family, which most families don't, right? Your parents, maybe you see them taking care of your grandparents, but you kind of don't realize like what's really going on there. And they don't share like how stressful it is, right? So you don't talk about it.
Mm.
And then one day you get a call from mom and dad who say, oh my gosh, I fell and broke a hip, or I had a heart attack, or dad's got cancer, or he's diagnosed with dementia. And you're swept into this unexpected situation, but you still don't talk about it, right? You don't say, well, how can I help you? Or I can't help you. Or how do we work this out? Or do we need to hire help? So family members, adult children get into this without having the conversation of, well, what are the needs and what are we doing here and what's everybody agreeing to?
Mm,
So then the kids jump in and maybe it's 5 hours a week, and then all of a sudden it's like 40 hours a week. And they have a
mm.
full-time job and they're married and they have kids and all of that. So that's where all the stress comes from. And caregiving stress is significant and it's real.
Yeah, it is. And for me, it's almost like, that whole, you just kind of tapped into something there for me in terms of quite often we don't, as family, it's a surface conversation. It's like you don't, it's like that pass the salt relationship, right? Where you just pass
Yes.
the salt and pepper at the table. I don't know if you've heard that term before, but what you're talking about here is breaking it down and getting underneath, in terms of, well, actually, what's really going on here? And what do we actually need to do? Because otherwise, it generally results in friction, can cause family disagreements, break a family, relationship down. And so by providing that caregiving support and advice, it's the ability then to, I guess, remove those barriers, remove those bias, kind of bits and pieces to be able to do that. Is that something that you see a lot of?
That is a big part of it. So, like this week, today, in fact, I talked to a caregiver who, there's a couple of siblings, and dad has memory loss. And the two siblings have very different ideas about what should be done. And one sibling wants to make plans and kind of make sure everything is okay. The other one is like, well, when dad decides he wants to do that, then, maybe I'll be okay, right? But the problem is because dad has memory loss, dad can't remember. The brain up here is not really working. And so the planner really is in a more practical state about this, where the other sibling is like, well, it's whatever dad wants. Well, there's a point where dad isn't going to remember what he wants.
No.
And
Yeah.
so that's where kind of like the friction and the differences come in, where you've got a planner and then you've got one who's saying, well, whatever dad wants.
Yeah. How though would a family even know to seek your support? Like what, yeah, like at what point? Or how do you, yeah, how are you then involved? Like how does it work in that regard?
So sometimes I'm contacted by adults who want to make their own plans. So parents who want to make their own plans, or single people, maybe we call them solo agers, but it's somebody who maybe has never been married, never had children, or they're divorced or they're widowed and they're like, "Oh my gosh, who's going to take care of me? How am I going to plan for this?" So that's one part. The other part are really a lot of adult children who are like, this is hard and we don't know what we're doing and we need some help. And mostly people find me through my YouTube videos, because my YouTube channel, I do the videos because caregivers ask questions. So every video on my YouTube channel is because a caregiver said, "Hey, what about this?" Or "I have questions about this," or "Can you do a video about that?" So that's a lot where people find me regardless of where they live, because they're like, "Oh my gosh, I have this problem and I need to talk to her."
Yeah, amazing. I'll have to add your YouTube channel to my notes. But you know what else? Like the solo ages, I've never heard that term before. Like it's fascinating, and I must be like a solo ager because I've never been married and I don't have children, right? But it's like I do sometimes think I've got a family. I've got, nieces and a nephew and my sister and brother and obviously my parents. But I just sometimes think about, oh, as I get older, like I'd like to think I'm going to meet a partner someday. But you think about these things where you're like, oh, well, who would look after me and what would happen? And I have it as
It's
a
a huge
thought, but
issue.
I don't do anything with it. Like, do you know what I mean? And now that I'm talking to you, I'm
Yes.
like, oh, maybe I should be like thinking about this a little bit more because I don't want to end up, not being looked after as I got older, for example. And the population is aging, like we've got an aging population, right? So you're probably seeing more and more statistically.
The statistics are actually frightening. And I know these numbers are not accurate, but I want to say, people over age 65 to 75, probably about, at least here in the States, 20% of these people live alone.
Yeah,
And
right.
so when you're living alone and maybe you have family, but maybe they live, 200 miles away or halfway across the country, right? There's nobody really looking in on you. And if you have a health condition that you can't manage, you may not be getting the care that you need from doctors and there's nobody to advocate for
Mm.
you. Or if you have memory loss, you're not going to notice because you have it. And if you're not around people who say, hey, you know what? You should get your memory checked out. Then these people just, it's a term here that we use called self-neglect, right? You're neglecting your care because you don't know that you need care because you have a cognitive problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. I want to just shift back to you mentioned that you had a career transition, and it sounds like it was later in life. Was that later in life that you had the career transition
It was
from?
midlife. So my parents died about 30 years ago, and it was actually so the losses in my family. My oldest sister, who was 29, was killed in a car accident when I was
Oh, so
17.
sorry.
And because I was the youngest of six kids and we were Catholic, there were a lot of funerals. So I was used to, my grandfather passed away and my grandmother and uncles and aunts and my sister. And then my parents and my oldest brother passed away about the same time. So back around between 1995 and 2000. And so after my parents passed away, I was the executor of their estate. I was back cleaning out their house, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to do something different. I was working in corporate America, and I'm like, well, how can I help people? So cleaning out, my mom was very wise. She left. She left my bedroom pretty much like as it was. There was a book in my bedroom that says like things I want to do when I grow up, right? And it was fly planes in the Air Force, be a forest ranger, join the Peace Corps, or help old people. And I get motion sick, so the Air Force was out. Peace Corps, I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. I was working in corporate America. And Forest Ranger, I'm like, well, that may be a little too isolating. So I'm like, okay, let me look at this help older people thing. So I was living in Venice Beach, California at the time, and I started to volunteer for this hospital elderly visitor program. And so I kind of adopted this older woman named Billy and just went to go see her every week. She had a brother who lived up in the valley, which in California, I mean, 20 miles could be like 3 hours because of
Yeah,
traffic.
yeah, yeah.
And so he would bring her groceries once a week and do all that. And just, it was a lovely thing. So I left my corporate career back in, the end of 1999, 2000, and I started company number one.
How fascinating. And I am so sorry about the losses that you had, especially a young sister and you at an age, at such an impressionable age of 17. Do you feel that through the forms of adversity that you encountered, that was part of the, I guess, soul searching and what's this all about and finding more meaning in life? And here you are in corporate life, you're in marketing, my background's advertising and communications, and you wanting to do something more purposeful in life, something that fulfills you, gives you more meaning. Do you think that was a part of the contribution to the career shift?
Absolutely. If I wouldn't have had the corporate experience, I wouldn't have learned how, I mean, I was responsible for P&Ls of millions of dollars, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have learned how to manage a business or market or sell or do any of that or speak or do any of that kind of stuff. And the life losses were really, I mean, I almost believe that my life was meant to be like that because if you haven't lost parents, if you haven't lost people, how do you counsel people about the experience, right? Because if you haven't had it, how can you counsel people? And so I had the losses of my parents, and then I had in my care agency and my fiduciary agency, I was legally responsible for people who died and who I had to turn off the machines on and who, because they're like, I don't want to be kept alive on a machine. I don't want this. I don't want
Wow.
this. I mean, I had clients who I put on hospice care and they passed away and I buried them and I did their estates. So, I mean, just through my personal experience and more my professional experience, that's why I have this expertise that is very deep and broad and rare.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like your lived experiences, but then working with others. It's such a gift. Did it automatically feel like for you that once you started moving into this space and finishing up in corporate life, was it just almost like you felt like you were at home, like you'd come back home, like into from an inside perspective? Like, did you feel like you were like, ah, this is what I'm meant to be doing? Like, was there something
Oh,
that,
absolutely. I
mm,
mean, and I did, and I took steps before I left, right? So I did this volunteer for this lady. I actually went back and I got career counseling because I'm like, okay, I'm going to take this jump, but am I jumping in the right place? And it
yeah,
was interesting. The career counseling was like social work and counseling and helping people and being an administrator and owning an agency and all of that. So I went about it very logically and then I left. And it just, and I'm not saying that it was not hard work, because it was very hard work to make that shift and start from
It
scratch.
is,
But
yes.
but I loved it, and I still love it, and I feel very blessed because I know a lot of people who've worked their entire lives and they haven't loved what they do. And I am so blessed to love what I do and to be able to have the skills to help people.
And especially in a space of caregiving, like it's such a, we were talking briefly pre-show. It's almost like we haven't lost the gift of how to care, but we've become so like, because everything is happening at such a rapid pace and we're all so busy and everything's got like, we've got so much going on. It's like we're all inward focused at times and not in a good way in terms of, like there's a loneliness epidemic, there's a lot going on here. And then you talk about elderly, solar aging, all of that sort of thing. Like, how do we bring this care? How do we bring this giving back into the world so that, everyone is feeling loved and genuinely loved and cared for?
I think it goes back to the family. So I mean, I was blessed. I had amazing parents, amazing, amazing parents. And so I think that had a very big effect on me because my mother was the family caregiver. She would take me to go see grandma, and she'd go take me to see aunts and uncles who weren't doing so well. And so she kind of modeled this behavior for me, not knowing that she was modeling this behavior, right? And so from a very young age, I loved old people. I just always, and I still do. And so I think it's families talking about caregiving, because parents are caregivers for children, right? So it starts at birth, and you're cared for by your parents. So it's, do you have loving parents? And not everybody does, and I know that's horrible, but it's true. So, what's the environment of your family, and are your parents teaching you to be caregivers for other people in the family? So are they taking care of grandma and grandpa, or, maybe they're brothers and sisters who are your aunts and uncles? So I think modeling these behaviors in families, but also there's the part where I talk about is you really have to understand that your quality of health affects your life when you're older. And so we all have to take that responsibility on ourselves, because the healthcare system is a system of prevention, right? You get sick and they work to try to prevent what's happening, right? But they don't prevent like what happens before you get sick, right? So are you eating healthy? Are you exercising? And we all know we should do these things, but sometimes we don't. And then we have these health issues. And then with older people, it's one health issue after the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. And I did a video the other day about, how will you leave your spouse? And I don't mean like leaving your spouse. I mean, when you die first, what have you set up so that your spouse can get the care they need and they're going to be okay without you? Because what happens in families is the first spouse to get sick may use up all the family money, and there's nothing left for the person who is the caregiver.
Yeah.
And so we really have to be talking about these things in families. What are you leaving behind if you're the first one to go?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I hadn't thought about it that way. And it's caregiving is such a cycle. It's such a like, to your point around, when you're born, your mum's the caregiver or, whoever is the caregiver. My mum's a caregiver in our family. And and yet I feel like, as she's getting older, it's like she's gifted me this caregiving. And so then it's now about caregiving mum, like looking after mum, if although she's still caregiving because she's a caregiver to my dad who's ill and all of that sort of thing. But do you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like you can pass that caregiving kind of around. It's just understanding how to do so. Tell me a bit about your book, The Caregiving Trap. Solutions
So
for
the
Life's
caregiving trap
Unexpected Changes. Yeah.
came from an older person. So people hear the word, the caregiving trap, and they're like, oh, I love it, I hate it, I whatever. Well, the name came from an older person who said to me, you know what, I am so trapped. I'm so trapped in this body that is sick and aging, and I can't get out of my house. I'm trapped. I got to take all these medications. This is just like the worst trap I could ever imagine myself to be in. And then I have the caregivers who have not had conversations with their parents about like, what does care look like and what do you want? And they start to help too much. And so they create a dependency that their parents have this expectation that they're going to continue to do all this for 10 or 20 years. Well, these caregivers are like, oh my God, what on earth did I do? I can't get out of this. My parents expect me to do all this. I want to have kids. I don't have time to have kids because I'm taking care of mom. So they don't have the boundary conversation or the practical conversation about, I may be able to help you for a couple years, but I can't do it for 5 or
Ever.
10 or 20.
Yeah.
So both sides feel trapped, but nobody's talking about feeling trapped.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. And so when did you decide that you wanted to write a book? Like where did it like obviously, it
Oh
was
my
from
gosh.
yeah.
That's a story in itself. So I've always been interested in writing like my whole life. And so I probably wrote this book 10 times before I wrote the book. And then I had an editor who just like changed it. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. So then I rewrote it like the 11th time and then it came out. So it really came from people saying, well, don't you have education? Don't you have a book? Don't you have something? Can't you come and speak? Can't you do educational things? And that's kind of why I transitioned out of company two into my current company, because people were like, well, you have such good information and you can educate people. Why don't you just do that? And I'm like, well, I can't do that and be like on call 24 hours a day. So I have to, make a choice to walk away from, because I was on call for 20 years around the clock. Something would happen because I was a legal person. I would get the phone call at 3 a.m. So I know what that's like for family caregivers. So I had to leave that so I could do what I do now.
Wow. Because yeah, one of my business mentors the other day and a good friend, he said to me, B, have you thought about writing your book yet? And I'm like, I don't know when I would find the time. I've got something in my head, but it's like actually having the ability to sit down and actually write it. I'm always fascinated in, I guess you make the time, right? Once you're focused on an
Have to. So I'll tell you how I did it. I made myself every Saturday for probably a year. That's all I did. I wrote on Saturdays every weekend, in and
such
out. And then the way I got good at speaking and all of this is back in 2009, a radio show in Denver, a radio company in Denver said, "Hey, will you do a show on caregiving?" I'm like, "Well, I guess I'm going to do that." And so for 2.5 years, every Sunday, I showed up at the radio station and did a live show. But it took 20 hours of work to produce that radio show live. And so I was very disciplined, regimented, scheduled, and I just did it. And the benefits that that has had I mean, I can't even explain it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love hearing these stories in terms of because you sound and you seem so disciplined and you set the boundaries. But then how do you also ensure that you're keeping your own cup full as a caregiving expert, education, consulting, expert witness in court, etc. Like, yeah.
Because of my early life and my parents passing away, I was 35 when my parents passed away, 35, 38. So I watched my mom, who was sick all of her life. And early on in my early 20s, I'm like, you know what? That is not going to be me. I'm not going to the hospital every Sunday. I'm not going to have heart problems. I'm not going to do that. I went and I took an aerobics class. Ever since then, almost every day, I get some kind of exercise and I eat well and I take care of myself. And that is a mandatory thing because I didn't want to have the life that my mother had where she was sick all the time. And I was the youngest of six, right? So every Sunday night I would get the call saying, I don't feel well. Can you take me to the hospital emergency room? So I was the one that showed up and I'm like, this is not at all how I want to live my life at all. So I made a decision very young that I was going to take care of myself and I still do.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. You really broke the tribal cycle, didn't you? Like in terms of like when you think about the family tribal cycle and you see it repeating in families and the patterns and even when it comes to
Yes.
caregiving, you would see so much of that. I'm probably sure you've done a YouTube video on this in terms of, or if not, it would be a great one to speak about because when it comes to caregiving because you've said I'm not doing that. I am actually going to look after myself as much as you love dearly love your mum, etc. And I think it takes a lot to break a family tribal cycle as well. Like, you see that a lot where it's just here we go again, here we go again. It's like, at what point does that change? What's your,
Well, I think it's starting to change because I mean, I talk to a lot of caregivers in India, and India is very much you take care of your parents, you take care of your grandparents if you're a woman, and that's all you do. And if you get married, your husband moves in and you both live with your parents and you take care of your parents and your grandpa, right? So there are cultures where and it's not just India, it's African nations, other nations all over the world where this is just like the expectation. And these daughters and sons are saying, you know what? This is not what I want to do. I want to go do something else. And so and a lot of times they're ostracized from their family. They're the black sheeps. They're the one that left. Or if children didn't have good relationships with their parents, it's usually like the child who's either the most responsible or had the best relationship with mom or dad that becomes the caregivers. The others who didn't, they're long gone.
Yeah,
And the problem is that sibling who's doing all the work may not understand the backstory of what happened with mom or dad and that sibling. So
yeah.
they're hating on their brother and sister, not realizing that mom or dad probably didn't treat them very well, and that's why they're not
No,
showing up.
no.
So it's
You,
all the family secrets and the things we don't talk about, right?
yeah, 100%. And that's what I'm talking about now. Like in terms of we just, yeah, everything gets swept under the carpet. Like in terms of, yeah, and how do you break it down? When you booked into the pod, I've got a couple more questions for you. When you booked in to do the podcast interview with me, or I shouldn't say interview, conversation, you responded to my question around, could you please provide a unique insight or experience when it comes to life, leadership, and business? And you said definitely something relating to caregiving and giving family members and others permission to realize that they don't have to be the solution to the problem. We've talked a lot about this, but I'd love to just go into that more. They don't have to be the solution to the problem. Again, back to this tribal cycle that we've just been talking about.
And so this comes from, I would have parents who would come into my office when I had my company called the Care Navigator. And they would say, well, we want to do our plan. And the first question I would say is, well, who's going to care for you? And they would say, oh, our children. And my question would be, well, have you asked your children? Have you had the conversation with your children? And these parents would say, oh, no, we just expect that that's what's going to happen. And I would say, well, what if that isn't what happens, right? So I really talk about the fact that everybody from, I don't care if you're 10 or 20 or 30, we all have to be responsible and take responsibility for our health because again, that impacts how we're going to age when we're older.
Mm,
And if our parents don't have the education to do that, we need to do that. So my mom had heart disease, right? She needed to have bypass surgery and she needed to lose weight. She didn't know how to do it. I called all these weight loss companies, Weight Watchers, and like, I don't know, probably 10 other. I had them mail all this information to her house because she didn't know how to navigate that. Only one of my parents graduated from high school. My dad was in the army, he was in the military. They were not educated people. And I went to school and I got a college education and all of that. So it really is up to there's some duty of children who may have more experience and education than their parents to kind of help their parents along with this so that their parents can come up with their own solutions, right? So mom or dad, I have a financial planner. Do you all have a financial planner? How's your retirement plan? How are you saving for money? Mom or dad, I'm going to have my estate plan done. I'm going to get my power of attorney documents done. Do you have yours? Why don't we all do this together? Right?
yeah.
So it depends on, obviously your level of education, your relationship with your parents, but in families, if you can help other family members kind of come along and learn about things that they don't know about, that kind of raises, they call it like raising the boat, right? Or raising the ship out
Yeah.
of the water. It raises everybody up to be more responsible and more proactive so that people can come up with their own solutions and say, well, yeah, I want to stay at home, so I'm going to save money or buy long-term care insurance here in the States so I can have home care. And I'm not going to put this burden on my children, right?
I love it.
So so it's these conversations and just the sharing of knowledge and education.
Yeah, it's great. It's also like for me, it's like solution finding together. Like, it's when we think about problem solution, the problem's never the problem. If we go from problem, we jump to a solution. But what you're talking about here is like, for me, how I would, and what I talk a lot to my clients about is this is find the solution together, solution finding. Let's not jump straight from or see it as a problem.
Right.
let's look at it as how do we find a solve for this? And so it doesn't feel like, oh my goodness, I've got this massive drama or it's too hard. Because when it comes to what you're doing, it's complex and it's health and it's getting older and there's fear around it. And there's almost like you probably get a lot of resistance in terms of no, everything's fine, when actually it's not. And like
Not.
it's and like what you're saying is, and when someone passes away or whatever, and then whoever's left behind, it's just it can be like, yeah, it can be diabolical. What would be one piece of advice, Pamela, you would give to anyone or a family who are needing, I guess they're at a crossroads in terms of from a caregiving perspective and not sure which way to turn, but know they need help? What would be your advice?
So one is to start having these conversations in the family. So mom or dad, what do you want? And then if you hit resistance, kind of what I always talk to people about is if you see that your parents start to need help, you really want to talk to them about a plan and a process and start it at least 3 to 5 years before you think they will need what I call serious care. Because here in the States, we have people that are going to run out of money. They're not going to be able to pay for their care. We have a state program called Medicaid that pays for care for the elderly. And I know other countries have this, it's just a different name. But you have to plan ahead because you have to say, okay, mom and dad, so you've got $200,000 and your care is going to cost $10,000 a month. That's only going to last less than 2 years. What are we going to do? So you have to be there's a practical part of like, how is your health? What kind of money do you have? And what kind of legal plans have you made? And you always need a backup plan. So whatever you think is going to happen might not happen at all. It may be like something totally unexpected happen. So I always talk to caregivers about you have a plan A and then maybe a B and a plan C for like what you don't expect that's going to happen. But you want to have these conversations in the family. But like I said before, parents may not want to talk about it. One of
No.
your siblings may not want to talk about it. So you kind of have to be the person that brings people together and says, look, we can't ignore this. We've
No.
got to do something. And if you all don't want to do anything, then I'm going to back off. And when something happens, you all take care of it. Don't come back to me. I'm setting my boundary. We're either going to talk about this and plan about it now, or when it happens later, it's on you. You guys take care of it.
You've given
How
some,
would you like to how would you like to handle this?
yeah. You've
Do you
given
like my help now or not at all?
you've given some great insights and also some great tips, like, being focused, disciplined, breaking through that resistance, setting those boundaries, that whole solution finding, but also ultimately planning ahead, but you can do that in a really non-linear way as well, right? But ultimately, it comes down to how can we, care, like that caregiving aspect. Pamela, how do we find out more about you? I will drop it into the show notes, but yeah.
Yeah, so my website, PamelaDWilson.com, so I have 3 online courses. They're absolutely free. The one that applies to really anybody, regardless of where you live, is Caring for Aging Parents. It's about 60 hours of content. There is one on there if somebody lives in the States or if power of attorney applies in a country, like what is a power of attorney? How do you do that? And then here we have guardianship and conservatorship. So what is that? My YouTube channel has 900 videos. Um, there's
Wow.
just a lot of content on my website and help.
Thank you.